Hello, this video is slightly different to the ones I usually do in that I'm not just kind of looking at the camera showing a couple of my games. This one is, as you can tell by the image on the screen now, is about Doom, one of my favourite game series. And really I just wanted to compare a couple of different versions that I own, namely the Gameboy Advance, the Super Nintendo, the Sega Saturn, Atari Jaguar and 3DO. I know that these consoles are all differing and from different generations, but I think it's quite interesting just to look at the different variations in the level layout, the textures used, things like the frame rate, music. I've not included the PlayStation version because it's the best version, and I wanted to really look at some of the not lesser versions, but ones that aren't really considered to be the ultimate, even though the Atari Jaguar version is pretty good, and the SNES one is quite good for a 16-bit console. Anyway, enjoy. So this is the Game Boy Advance version. It uses the same level set as the Atari Jaguar version, so it has similar architecture and monster layout and things like that. One of the things you will notice is that all of the baddies have green blood, and that's mainly down to Nintendo's reluctance to have any like red entrails and things in their games, just like with Mortal Kombat, etc. from back in the SNES days. Another thing you'll notice as well is that the enemies' corpses kind of vanish after you've shot them. They don't stay around. That's more than likely just something to do with the limitations of the Game Boy Advance and the memory. One interesting thing about this, what you'll notice in this video as well, is the way that the status bar at the bottom of the screen changes depending on the version. Sometimes it's grey, sometimes it's brown, and also the way that the different compartments on the actual status bar do actually move around as well. This is, for the Game Boy Advance, quite an impressive feat really, because it's got all the texture mapped ceilings and floors, which you'll see in the SNES version aren't there. And yeah, it's pretty faithful really, obviously apart from the green blood, to the original version. Definitely a version worth seeking out if you've got a Game Boy Advance. Although it does tend to be a bit expensive these days. Certainly Doom 2 does anyway, but we're not talking about Doom 2, we're talking about this, which is Doom 1. And it's also got all the sort of sound effects and things, which is a nice touch, especially if you've got headphones in. Okay, next up we have the Super Nintendo version. The first thing you'll notice about this one is that the frame rate's pretty slow. But as well as that, you'll also note that the floors and ceilings have no textures. This is more than likely down to the technical limitations of the system more than anything. That said, I do think it's quite a technically impressive feat that the developers managed to pull off here, using the Super FX chip, I believe. Interestingly, even though this came out before the Game Boy Advance version, obviously, but it's still on the Nintendo system. But there's still red blood. Another thing that you'll notice as well is that there's no barrels in this game. Usually, when you open that door, you will see a barrel, and that kind of sets up the scene for you to shoot the barrel, and it explodes and kills those two baddies. In this bit, there's a column just there in the centre of the hall that isn't there in the other versions. And then around this corner you'll also note that this particular section is raised up as opposed to flat as it is in, again, all the other versions on console, anyway, that I've played. Which is a bit strange. You'd think that the developers would have left that bit flat just because it'd be easier for the Super Nintendo to handle. Here, around this corner, you'll note again that there are no barrels in the game. Which, it's quite odd when you think about it, because in a lot of places the barrel does feature as a gameplay point. The sound's quite muffled, but it does have music, which is nice. And the shotgun doesn't actually fire a spread of kind of buckshot in the SNES version. It fires a single bullet. With infinite range, I believe, so you can shoot something pretty much on the other side of the level with the shotgun, because it acts more like a rifle than an actual shotgun. Interestingly as well, there's only the front-facing animation for the baddies, so you don't get any side or back views. You'll only get there's no infighting either. And yeah, there's the different texture for the end room. Okay, moving on to the 32-bit systems. This is the 3DO version. The barrels are back, but what you'll also notice is that there's a massive border around the screen. That's actually on the biggest setting. The status bar on this clip is cut off at the bottom for reasons unknown. I did record it the same as the other versions that I've got, and for whatever reason the capture device decided to cut half the screen off. But you can just see that at the bottom, and that gives you an impression of the size of the screen when it's on the TV. The game doesn't run particularly well. It's quite jittery. And yeah, that's the biggest. There is a cheat that can make it full screen, but I dread to think how bad it would be. And for some reason I think I put this on a harder difficulty level than the other version, so that's why there's more enemies on the screen. This section again is flat, when on the SNES it was raised. Again, the barrels are back, and there is a little bit of lighting. See, when you shoot the shotgun, there is a bit of a flicker. The textures as well are quite similar to the Gameboy Advance version. You do tend to see a little bit more of the shotgun as well in this version. I don't know if that's just me, but you can see a bit more of where the stock would be as the gun is being reloaded. The standout thing about the 3DO version is the music. It was all re-recorded specifically for the game by a rock band, I believe. I'll shut up a sec so you can hear it. But yeah, it does have problems with the frame rate. I believe it's down to the development time that the developer was given. The developer did come out recently and give an expose on the development process, which was pretty horrendous by all accounts. So here we have the Sega Saturn version. As you can tell from the way that door opened just there, the frame rate isn't the best. This version of the game was handled by GT Interactive, not id Software. You can see from the way the gun just shot there and there was no muzzle flash that it's quite buggy. I mean, you can see the frame rate playing out in front of you. It's actually quite difficult because of the frame rate. It's hard to actually position yourself and shoot certain enemies because the frame rate is just so erratic. It will freeze up and slow. It will speed up and slow down as you're playing it. Another game with the flat section here as opposed to the raised up. I believe this version for the Sega Saturn is actually the same as the PlayStation version, but just without the nice disco lighting of the PlayStation version. Also, the soundtrack is slightly different to the much more rocky 3DO version that you just heard. More ambient. It's a strange version of this because in some levels it really grinds and it's almost to a halt in places, but in other places it's quite smooth. The Saturn's obviously a capable 3D machine with things like Quake on it and Duke Nukem, but for whatever reason Doom just wasn't the best, to be honest. So this is the Atari Jaguar version, and this is the version that I think pretty much all of the other console versions are based off. You can see that the texture set is pretty much identical to the one that was in the first video for the Game Boy Advance. And the frame rate is pretty solid in this version. One thing that is a problem is the fact that the Atari Jaguar joypad doesn't allow you to sort of circle strafe. That can be a bit of an issue at times. You have to hold the button down and then press left and right. You do also have the flat section again here. What you don't get is music in the Jaguar version, just because of the way of the Jaguar architecture. I believe it was something to do with the way that certain clock cycles were taken up with inputs and graphics, and that's why there's no music in the game. So I'm told, so I've read. Other things that are missing, there's certain levels are missing in the Jaguar version, and there are certain enemies that aren't included as well, just because of the cartridge size. But I'm led to believe this is the one that sort of John Romero and his team worked on first for the consoles, and he is quoted as saying this is his favourite version. Whether or not that's true or not, I don't know. But this is, as I say, a pretty solid conversion of Doom. Last but not least is the Sega 32X version. This isn't actually running on 32X; it's running on OpenEMU on the Mac, and it's a good version. You've got the border around the screen. It runs quite well. It differs from the SNES version, which is what you would compare it to really, in that it's got the textures on the ceiling and on the floor. It does have a slightly smaller level accompaniment, but apart from that, it's pretty much got everything that the other versions have got. It's even got the barrels, and it does have the different frames of animation and views for the different enemies. So you've got the side and the back, and you can have infighting, etc. And interestingly, you've also got music, which was obviously absent from the Atari Jaguar version, even though the Jaguar is purportedly a 64-bit system, and this is just an add-on for the Mega Drive. But yeah, this is emulated, so I just wanted to show it anyway, just because it's it's a fairly competent version. And interestingly, there's a bit of wood there at the end as well, which is nice. Well, thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that trip down Doom memory lane. There's quite a lot of stuff I didn't mention. Certain things such as the way the text when you pick up an item is displayed at different points on the screen in the various ports. Sometimes it's at the top of the screen, sometimes it's just above the status bar. Things like the music being different, and also the ending screens, like the summary screen for when you complete the level. Some of them have different music and different backgrounds, and even different transitions on how the game goes from the game engine to the screen itself. And also, quite interestingly, the way the buttons differ. The way at the end of the level, the button that you press is either, as I say, a push button or a switch, like a lever that you pull. But it's quite interesting just to see how the different ports vary. As I said, thanks very much for watching, and yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.